Hello, welcome back to virtual English class. By now, I'm sure you've heard the news. We will not be back in regular shark decorated English class for the remainder of this year. With that said, I will continue seeing you on a weekly basis here. And remember, however you are feeling about the school closure, it is valid. You may have a wide range of emotions about this, maybe a little bit of unease, maybe a little bit of uncertainty, maybe a little bit of disappointment, maybe a little bit of worry. These are all very valid. You are not overreacting. It is not weird. Remember that you are still stadium students. You still have all the supports. I'm still here, even if it's through a computer screen. Your principals are still there, even if they're through a computer screen. Your counselors are still reachable via email. You're not by yourself, even if you are somewhat isolated right now. The world is still there. So are we. Now, onto the lesson. We are actually not going to be moving forward in Caesar today. We are going to be going backwards a little bit as we learn some new stuff, and then we are going to be diving into the funeral orations next time. So, you will need loose leaf today. Obviously, I can't make sure you take notes, but I highly recommend that you do, because it's going to be a lot easier for you to remember if you've written stuff down. So, make sure you have your copy of Caesar, make sure you have your Teams document open. Oh, speaking of Teams, make sure that you are turning things in via Teams. I am not accepting stuff that you email to me. Turn it in via Teams. You will see the assignment. You will see a Word document associated with the assignment. Type your answers directly in the Word document and submit it that way. You will have a week from when I post this assignment, meaning that will be Monday I should probably have looked this up. Monday the 20th at midnight to submit your final assignment. All right, learning target. I am posting this on April 13th, 2020. Your learning target. I will understand rhetorical appeals and rhetorical devices. Likewise, I will understand the difference between them, even though I didn't write that. Your success criteria. I will be able to identify and explain the use of rhetorical devices and appeals in monologues. More specifically, Brutus and Cassius's monologues from Act 2. So stuff we've already gone over. So, this is going to be mostly via PowerPoint. By the way, why didn't someone remind me that I can just record my PowerPoints? Would have made life so much easier. Doink. Make sure that you've got your Teams document open. Make sure you've got your copy of Julius Caesar handy. Grab a pencil, grab some loose leaf, and off we go. Let's get started with the do now. Yes, I cannot actually make you take notes this time, arg, but I really do recommend taking notes. Writing this down will help you remember. So make sure you have your copy of Caesar, make sure you have some loose leaf. Then hop over to the Teams page to that Word doc. Remember, do your work on the Word doc and submit it via Teams. So your do now. How is someone's personality going to affect how they argue or how they try to convince others? This should take you about 5 minutes, meaning I should see more than 2 sentences. Go ahead and pause while you get that done. Today we're going to be talking about the rhetorical appeals and rhetorical devices. By the way, make sure you keep them separate. So, right now we're talking about appeals. Devices are going to come later. They're not the same thing. These are Aristotle's work again. I was not kidding when I said that Aristotle was going to show up in everything this semester. So, when Aristotle was thinking about what made an effective speech, he came up with 4 specific things that led to effective communication. We're only going to worry about 3 of them. You're not necessarily going to see all 3 of these in every single good speech, because everyone has their own strengths and weaknesses. So some people use one appeal more than the other. Some people use, all of the appeals blended. Whatever works. But in a good speech, you're going to see at least one of these, probably more. The first one, ethos or athos. I will accept either pronunciation. This has to do with credibility or character. This is the one that people have the most trouble with. I'm just going to warn you. Basically, the big question with ethos: why should I believe this speaker? Are they an expert? Are they someone whose morals agree with mine? So, you guys just got finished with your research papers. In those research papers, you all were establishing ethos by citing facts, by proving that you had done expert research. By citing those facts, you made yourself more credible. I knew that you had done some work and that you hadn't just pulled these ideas out of thin air. That made me trust your ideas more, thus establishing ethos. However, you can also have ethos because of character. Think of Brutus. He's just such a good dude that everyone trusts him. He has established ethos that way. So when Brutus says something, even though he's not like an expert on necessarily what he's talking about, is he an expert on murder plots? Obviously not. Yet everyone listens to him because he's just such a good guy. So, to put this in another way, in terms of ethos, would you trust me in terms of a grammar question? The answer I'm looking for is yes. You would trust me because I have credibility. I have credibility because I'm an English teacher. Would you trust me on, I don't know, the most effective ways to edit YouTube videos? Obviously not. I do not have credibility there. I do not have ethos. My expertise is not in that field. Likewise, think about character. Think about the most trusted mentor, confidant, good person who leads you in the right ways. That person has ethos for you. So if they're giving you advice, you're probably going to trust them because you know that they've got a good heart and they've got your best interests in mind. That is ethos. Why should I even listen to this speaker? Then let's go to pathos, I will take either. Now, you will remember this was one of your vocab words earlier this year. Just do me a favor, nod. You remember that this was a vocab word. Now, English has appropriated this word to mean like sadness and sort of the sadder, drippier, wah, poor me emotions. But in terms of rhetoric, pathos has to do with any emotion. If you are feeling a thing, that is pathos. So, the big question for pathos is, what do I feel? If I have made you feel angry deliberately, that is pathos. If I have made you feel excited, that is pathos. If your speaker has made you feel, I don't know, motivated, that is pathos. Note that this is deliberate. So if I accidentally make you feel something, that's not really pathos. That's just me messing up my speech. All right, then let's go to the final one. Logos, logic. This is all in, why does this argument make sense? How does the speaker connect their points? Note, there will often be some overlap between ethos and logos. Things often make sense because you can back them up with credible facts. Again, think of that research paper. But if you're telling me something has to do with logos, I should see lots of logical connections. You should be showing me how A leads to B, how B leads to C, etc. Let's practice. I'm going to show you all a bunch of print advertisements. Now, rhetorical appeals are designed to persuade, right? So is advertising. Inherently, advertising is trying to persuade you to buy something, to support an idea, to support a brand, to think a certain way. So, advertising inherently uses these appeals. Not necessarily all of them. And obviously this will be in a slightly different way than when you're reading a speech. But let's see what we can find. Oh, and if you were curious, which of course you were, that fourth rhetorical appeal that Aristotle talked about was kairos, which means saying the right thing at the right time. We're not going to worry about that right now, though. So, here we have a Nike ad. You'll note, Nike doesn't even bother to put its name on this. You just see the swoosh and you know. Let's take a look at the appeals. Let's start with ethos. Do we see any expert opinions here? Yes, we do. We see a gymnast. Okay, a gymnast makes a lot of sense for a Nike ad, right? Why would you trust a gymnast about sports clothes? Well, duh. They're athletes. If a gymnast says that, Nike produces the best leotards or whatever, I guess they'd know what they're talking about. Likewise, you have another form of expert opinions. This isn't just a gymnast. This is Simone Biles. She's a famous gymnast. So all of a sudden, that lends more credibility. Simone Biles, one of the, winningest, if that's a word, one of the winningest US Olympians, one of the best and most famous gymnasts in the world. Yeah, if she's saying Nike is good, I bet it is. That's ethos. Logos. Do we see any logic in here? Not really. But let's talk pathos. You're supposed to feel a thing when you look at this ad. I mean, you've got Simone Biles mid-backflip, totally focused. You're supposed to feel inspired. You're supposed to feel motivated. They've also got a call to action. Do things history could only dream of. That's supposed to make you feel like fired up and inspired and let's go get them, let's go do it. Speaking of which, then you look at the bottom. You've got that swoosh and just do it. Again, that's supposed to be a motivational technique. That's supposed to make you feel inspired. So we've got that ethos of Simone Biles. We've got that pathos of go out and do it. Okay. Well, right off the bat, you probably focused on the image. Let's talk about this slightly backwards. Let's start with pathos. Think about it this way. How is it that that image makes you feel a thing? Well, that's a gun. Guns inherently should make you feel threatened, scared, alarmed. They're a danger sign. And yet, it's being loaded not with bullets, but with cigarettes. So this is trying to make you make the connection in your head of these cigarettes are just as dangerous as bullets. But it's doing it by bringing in that rhetorical appeal of pathos to make you see gun and cigarette and feel the same connection, which might arguably be logos, as well as a little bit of pathos, between cigarettes dangerous, guns dangerous. Now, it's got this ginormous list of all sorts of stuff that cigarettes might do to you. That would fall under logos. Logically, why should I be so worried about these cigarettes? Well, there you go. Now, think for a second. Which is the rhetorical appeal that we're missing here? We've got our logos. Here's some reasons not to do the thing. We've got the pathos. You should feel a certain way about the thing. But we're actually missing ethos here. How do you know that this is true? And yes, I know, before you email me in a furor about this, yes, this is all true, blah, 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 but we don't see anything cited. We don't know who's publishing this ad. If we had a logo at the bottom saying this is from the National Institute of Health, this is from an anti-smoking research group, that would add ethos. But right now, these are just words on a screen, and you don't know where they're from. So that is an important thing that is missing. Okay, it's LeBron. And yes, I know it's another Nike ad, so sue me. They're good at this. So, we've got LeBron doing something that looks vaguely athletic. Clearly, I don't have ethos when it comes to athletes. And he is apparently saying something good about Nike. Let's go through the appeals. We've got our ethos, our logos, and our pathos. How is it that this ad would have ethos? Exactly, LeBron. Why is it that you would trust Mr. James's opinion on athletic wear? Well, He's an athlete, and he's one so famous that even I knew about him, so he must be a big athlete. Likewise, do we see any pathos in here? How are you supposed to feel as you look at this ad? This is similar to the Simone Biles one, but if you look at, again, Mr. James's face, you will see he looks incredibly focused. He looks motivated. He looks driven. He looks like he's actually working really hard. So you're supposed to feel much of the same way. Do we see any logos in this? No, not really Nike's forte here, but you can see that pathos and that ethos. I didn't include the Sarah McLachlan song in the background. You're welcome. Well, this one should be pretty simple. What's our appeal? Exactly. This is pathos. How are you supposed to feel when you see this poor little kitty cat in the dark, in a cage, looking out at you? Poor little whiskers all a-tremble, probably. Okay, I'm gonna stop that now. But yes, you are supposed to feel a way when you look at this. Likewise, the only text on here is being cute a crime? Good rhetorical question. The answer is clearly no. It's trying to make you feel so sorry for this poor little kitty cat. With that said, do we see any logos here? No, not really. Do we see any ethos? Arguably, because you see ASPCA down at the bottom and you know that they're an animal organization. Other than that, not so much. We're now going to move from print advertisements back into the text. Hop back over to Cassius's speeches on 782 to 785, where he's trying to convince Brutus to join in on the plot and to think poorly of Caesar. You're going to look through his speeches. You are going to find examples of ethos, logos, and pathos in his work. Note, Cassius does have all of these, but he has his favorite appeal. So you're not going to find equal amounts of these. So don't freak out if you have considerably more of one than the others, but I should see multiple. What you're going to do is you're going to give me the line number for whatever quote, the appeal that that quote deals with, and why the quote triggers that appeal. You do not need to give me the whole quote. The line number is going to do that. You also don't have to work in full sentences. A list is fine. For example, if you wanted to find me where Cassius is trying to establish Athos as an honorable, strong Roman by talking about that stupid swimming competition that he got into with Caesar, you would say line blah, 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 Athos shows that he is strong and fully Roman, trying to impress Brutus. Make sense? I say as if you're gonna answer me directly. Anyways, makes sense, I guess. Then you're going to do the same thing for Brutus's monologues on 802 to 804, where he's talking to the conspirators about how they should behave as they murder a guy. Again, you are not going to find equal numbers of examples of ethos, logos, and pathos because Brutus, again, has a strength. But you're going to do the same thing you did for Cassius. So I need a line number, an appeal, and why that works. Just like with Cassius, you can do list form and you don't have to do complete sentences. This should take you a while. I should see a bunch of answers here. So go ahead and pause, hop back over to your Teams form, and start listing. So I was not kidding when I said you were going to get uneven numbers, right? So tell me, or don't actually tell me yet, think about, what is Cassius's dominant appeal? What is he best at out of those appeals? And why might he be best at that particular appeal? Consider who he's talking to, consider his purpose, and most importantly, consider his personality. Who is Cassius? This goes back to that do now. How does that affect how Cassius argues, how Cassius persuades? Then think about the same thing for Brutus. Now, you're going to hop back into that Teams form. You are going to explain that to me. For number 4, what are Cassius's best rhetorical appeals? For number 5, how about Brutus? And for number 6, why? What is it about these people specifically that makes them argue or work the way that they do? The bulk of your work here should be on question number 6, by the way. All right, so we covered rhetorical appeals, the 3 of them that we're worried about. Now we're going to go into rhetorical devices. These are different. So, rhetorical appeals are ethos, logos, and pathos. They're the backbone of your argument. But rhetorical devices, my highlighter changed color. Whatever, we're not going to worry about that. Rhetorical devices are how you get that effect. So, a rhetorical device is deliberate use of words. Note the deliberate. This is not accidental. The deliberate use of words to produce a specific and planned effect. We covered repetition in the poetry unit, and yes, it's the same thing. Repetition is still repeated words or phrases. It's still used for deliberate emphasis. However, especially here, I would like you to consider word placement, connotation, overall tone, and all of those other general things that we look at. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. What I would like you to do with repetition, especially in Shakespeare, is look beyond the obvious. So, yes, when your mom is mad at you and she tells you that she has told you over and 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 over to pick up your socks, the over and over is repetition, but it can also be a little bit more subtle than that. Likewise, when I say that repetition is used for rhetorical emphasis, yes, that is true. But you need to tell me emphasizing what and how. Don't just say it's used for emphasis. For example, in that mom has told me over and over and over example, yes, that's emphasis, the over and over. But what is it emphasizing? That she's annoyed. How does it emphasize it? By making it sound like she just spends her entire life chasing you around asking you about whatever chore. Make sense? I keep saying that like you're going to, I don't know, pop through the screen and talk to me. But if it doesn't make sense, leave me a comment so that I can clarify it, hopefully in our next YouTube meetup. So I'm going to give you a couple more sophisticated examples of repetition. First one, Nori was a Catholic because her mother was a Catholic, and Nori's mother was a Catholic because her father was Catholic, and her father was a Catholic because his mother was Catholic, or had been. So the first thing that might jump out at you, we see a lot of Catholic going on here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, so in one sentence, 6 repetitions of the word Catholic. Don't just tell me this emphasizes that her family is Catholic. Yes, we know. What else does it emphasize? Well, I mean, yes, they're definitely very religious, but I also see a more subtle form of repetition. I see a lot of family connections going on here. So we've got that her mother was Catholic. Where did my mouse go? Oh, there it is. Okay, so her mother was Catholic, her father was Catholic, and apparently her grandparents were Catholic too. So I'm seeing not only that this is a very religious family, but also that the religion has something to do with their family connections. So when I was explaining the emphasis, I would say that the repetition of both Catholic and family connections indicates a deeply religious family that has very deep ties to previous generations or is heavily influenced by previous generations. Make sense? All right. On to Coleridge. I looked upon the rotting sea and drew my eyes away. I looked upon the rotting deck, and there the dead men lay. Well, connotation. Let's talk connotation. I've got rotting. That's generally pretty negative, right? Rotting, decaying, crumbling away, often smells. I've also got dead. That's generally pretty negative too. We can agree on that. So let's look at this again. You wouldn't say just Coleridge uses rotting for emphasis. Yes, we know. How? So we've got rotting sea. Well, that doesn't work logically. Water can't decay, per se. But when you think about the image of rotting sea, we think of the sea as like fresh and clean, salt spray in the air, refreshing. There's a reason Yankee Candle sells all those ocean scents. But think about a rotting sea, full of filth, putrescence, smells gross. Maybe there's like scum on top of it. Blah. Okay, well, you definitely don't want to be in that, right? And yet, apparently our speaker in this poem, our narrator, is on a rotting deck. So his ship doesn't seem to be doing very well either, is it? So you could say something about how Coleridge uses repetition of the word rotting and dead to show that everything is crumbling, everything is falling apart. Make sense? So not just that you gross, but that this is permeating everything else that's going on. Finally, let's go back to Shakespeare, though not Julius Caesar. My conscience hath 1,000 several tongues, and every tongue brings in a several tale, and every tale condemns me for a villain. That was complicated. That was deliberately complicated. Let's look at this. So my conscience, my inner voice, hath 1,000 several tongues. Okay, so in my head, my little Jiminy Cricket, you did good, you did bad voice is screaming at me constantly. It's like it has 1,000 voices. So there's a lot going on in this person's head. And every tongue brings in a several tale. Okay, so his little Jiminy Cricket voice in his head that's telling him he did wrong, each little voice that he hears is telling him a different reason why he's not doing well. And every tale condemns me for a villain. Okay, so we've got a lot going on in his head, giving him a lot of different reasons why he's not doing well in life. Why is it that that is so complicated, though? We see the repetition. Think about how hard it was for me to say that line. Like, read that to yourself. You probably are going to stumble over it. So you would say something in this case like, Shakespeare uses the complicated structure and repetition in this sentence to emphasize how turbulent and confused and remorseful the speaker is. All right, let's move on. Your next term is antistrophe. Yes, I know, it looks like antistrophe. It's antistrophe, just trust me on that. This is a specific form of repetition. It's still repetition. You're still going to see the same stuff repeated, but specifically, the words and phrases that are repeated will happen at the end. So that can be the end of a sentence, that can be the end of a clause, that can be the end of a line, but it has to be close enough that you're going to recognize it as the same phrase over and over. Often, antistrophe sets up a rhythm. So you get used to the same phrase at the end of every single line, and then the very last use of antistrophe will jar you somehow. It'll change things up to make that point. For example, I have a quote here from Modern Family. The family turtle is dead. Manny, the kid, is distraught. He loved this turtle. He's giving a eulogy for his turtle. And he says, Shell Turtlestein was many things, but above all, he was my friend. When I didn't get a date with Fiona Gunderson, Shell was there. When I didn't get to play the part of Tevye, Shell was there. And when a raccoon broke into my room, unfortunately, Shell was there. Rest in peace, turtle. All right, so you can see The "Shell was there" is repeated over and over at the end of the lines. Let's look at how this makes a point. This is a eulogy. He's trying to emphasize how missed this turtle will be. So in these two, these are both good things. So Manny doesn't get a date with the girl that he thinks he's in love with, and Shell is there for him. His little reptilian friend who comforts him after this heartbreak. Manny gets crushed again because he doesn't get the part that he wants in the school play, and Shell is there to comfort him, his best buddy. But then the final one, this one here, this is very clearly a negative. So Shell is still there, but unfortunately he's there in an inopportune place that leads to his death, meaning Shell is no longer going to be able to be there for Manny. So when you were explaining this, you would say something like, Manny uses antistrophe to emphasize that Shell was an essential part of his life, his best friend, and that now he is deprived of Shell's company, and that it will be devastating. Make sense? Another great example of this, if you're a Lord of the Rings fan, Aragorn's speech outside the gates of Moria, the Battle of Morannon, where he keeps repeating, "But not this day." Just Google it. Anyways, moving on. Verbal irony. This is, usually we describe this as sarcasm, but it's not just sarcasm. Basically, it's just meant to be interpreted as the opposite of the literal meaning or the usual meaning. It's not what the words actually look like. So if I say, my students just love their homework, I'm going to assign extra. That would be standard sarcasm. Do you guys love homework? Exactly. And to the two people who said, yes, I do, great. Keep doing that. Thumbs up. Now, when you, that page number is wrong. When you read through the funeral speeches, Antony is going to keep referring to the conspirators as honorable men. Does Antony actually mean that they're honorable, they're good guys? Obviously not. They just stabbed his best friend. So this would be an example of verbal irony. As he keeps saying honorable men who stabbed this guy, you're supposed to start wondering, is there a second meaning to that? And here's my favorite. That was verbal irony. The rhetorical question. As we've discussed several times this year, the rhetorical question is a thinking question. It's a rhetorical device that's supposed to make your audience consider things, but consider things in a way that you have planned out. So, it is not actually designed to be answered, because it is supposed to be so spectacularly obvious that no one needs to. But with that said, a well-done rhetorical question needs to make sure that it's pushing the reader to think in the right direction. And in order to do that, the writer needs to consider their own assumptions and the listener's assumptions. What I mean by that, if I asked you guys, why is it that a cell phone would ever be necessary in the classroom? I, as a teacher, have the assumption that cell phones are just not, they don't belong in a classroom. However, you guys, as modern kids, have the assumption that a cell phone is just necessary for always. Therefore, we're going to have a disconnect, and that rhetorical question isn't going to work. Likewise, when Brutus is talking to the conspirators, he keeps asking these rhetorical questions about, well, what do we need other than our own honor to make this work? Why would we even do this if it wasn't for honor? Those rhetorical questions are flops because Brutus isn't considering that he does everything based on honor, but his listeners totally don't. They're there for personal gains. Make sense? So, if I say, we're planning to go swimming in unfamiliar heavy rapids infested with angry piranhas during a hurricane, what could possibly go wrong? All right, so we see some verbal irony here. But how is it that I have checked these tick boxes? Is the answer to this spectacularly obvious? Yeah, going swimming in rapids that you don't know with angry little bitey fish in the middle of a rainstorm, well, there's a lot of stuff that could go wrong, and all of that should have run through your head. Likewise, Brutus again. He keeps trying to shame the conspirators and to remind them of their Romanness. But this doesn't work because he's not considering everyone else's assumptions. He's assuming everyone else is as honorable as he is. All right, then hyperbolic comparison. This should remind you of the word hyperbole. Same basic idea. A hyperbole is an exaggeration for a purpose. Hyperbolic comparison is another way of saying that. It is an over-the-top comparison to make a point. So, if I say when she sings, her words are flights of angels sprinkling rainbows and sparkly confetti on the ears of the listeners, I hope that's not literal, because that would be terrifying. But it's making that really over-the-top comparison to say that, yeah, she can sing. She's got a good voice. It's amazing. Would that have been the same if I just said she has a good voice? Not really. The over-the-top comparison just made it more apparent how amazing I consider her voice to be. Or if I say, this is literally the worst disaster in the history of the entire universe. Literally. The worst, if I'm comparing something to the worst disaster in the history of the universe, it better be bad, right? Okay, as I said before, for emphasis means to produce an effect. I need to see what effect and how. Please, 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 remember this. Do not just say, this is done for emphasis. Make sense? All right, here's a question stem for you. If you are stuck, you can always use this. In wherever you saw it, this character uses this thing to this effect. For example, did I really animate just the example? Okay, in Act 3, Scene 1, okay, so that's that chunk, Antony, character, uses hyperbole, device, to make the conspirators feel pity for him and not worry over what he might do next. Okay, that's what it did. Now I've got to explain that, though. So, moving on, how does he do that? Antony speaks to Caesar's corpse, saying that, had I as many eyes as thou hast wounds, weeping as fast as they stream forth thy blood, to make his grief seem as fatal and damaging as someone bleeding out from the arteries. This then makes his listeners feel sympathy as they picture an arterial spray of tears from someone literally crying themselves to death. This also then makes Antony seem emotionally fragile and weak, so the conspirators saw him as far less of a threat. That is a thorough explanation. I have explained who does what, how it affects people, and why it works. Make sense? I really have to stop saying that. It makes sense. Whatever. Okay, so if I say something like, Antony uses rhetorical devices, why is that not a great way of explaining anything? Exactly. What devices? Where? How does he use these devices? Why do they work? I don't see any of that. I just see Antony uses rhetorical devices. Please do not do this. Nope. In Act 1, Cassius asks rhetorical questions to make Brutus think. Okay, that's better. I see a where. I see a who, which I guess I saw in the first one too. I see a rhetorical device. With that said, that's a really lousy what it's doing. Make sense? What about in Act 1, Cassius tells a story about Caesar nearly drowning in order to show ethos? That's better yet. I still see where we found this. I see who said it. I see what they did, but I don't see how this does anything. I don't see the explanation. So if I saw instead, in Act 1, Cassius tells a story about Caesar nearly drowning in order to show ethos by proving himself the stronger and better swimmer and character, That would work better. So, I would like you to go back to Cassius and Brutus's speeches that you were looking at and find rhetorical devices next. You found the appeals. Now find me the devices that make the appeals work. Now, don't do this for literally everything or you're going to be writing forever. Find me 1 to 2 devices that contribute to each appeal and tell me why they work. So, do not just tell me that you see rhetorical questions used to develop pathos. Great. How? What? Where? When? And that's all for today. Thank you very much for bearing with me through Death by PowerPoint. Yes, I know it's not quite Death by Notes, but same basic effect. Also, please enjoy the School of Hammerheads. It seemed appropriate. It's a school. It makes sense. Just trust me on this. All right, so before I sign off, I have been doing some research on the internet, and I have found you some things to occupy your time if you find yourself burdened with an overabundance of it, as many of us do right now. The first thing, I mean, obviously it has to do with sharks, but it's cute sharks. Like cute as in cute to people who aren't me. So I'm going to link down below in the description box a couple of things that might entertain you if you are just bored. The first one, Monterey Bay Aquarium is a great resource if you just want something calming to watch. They have live casts of a lot of their big fish tanks, including their kelp tank. Yeah, I know, kelp's a seaweed, but there are fish in there too. There are also leopard sharks. If you guys remember the little spotted sharks that were on your bathroom passes first quarter, those are they. They are tiny, they're adorable, and they don't show up half often enough for me. It's mostly fish, but it's very calming and relaxing, so that's your first thing. Your second thing, if you're more of an outdoorsy type, I found a whole bunch of mini videos from various parks. And they're small clips, but they're showcasing different parts of the park, just to sort of give you a little taste of the outdoors while you're stuck inside. So if you like mountain trails, if you like waterfalls, if you like bird song, these might be good resources for you. So I will include those. Those are the minute-long Zen something something forest something clips. I forget exactly what it's titled. The third thing is totally random, but my sports ball people. If you are missing your sports ball, I have for you marble races. Yes, you heard me right. I know you have wanted this your entire life, to see marbles going down a giant dirt track. By the way, I'm not kidding when I say giant. Like, hats off to the person who did these things. My chosen marble did not win in this one, by the way. Still a little sad. It's fine. I was cheering for him the whole way. But it's actually remarkable in terms of engineering and in terms of dedication. I recommend checking it out, if only just to laugh at the fact that I watched this. Stay safe, people. Stay healthy. Remember that even if you are stuck inside, the world is still out there. Things will go back to normal. For now, I will see you next week. Bye.